Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. If you're a chief executive, or if you think like one, and you want to create exponentially greater impact, then this show is for you. My name is Richard Medcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the most successful and impressive CEOs and executive teams on the planet and help them achieve extraordinary results. And no matter how successful you've been in the past, there's always a whole new level of impact available to you. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. In this conversation, I speak with Zoisa North-Bond. Zoisa is the CEO of Octopus Energy's business and generation business units. And Octopus Energy is the 23rd fastest growing company in Europe, according to the Financial Times. They've really innovated on both the retail level and on the technology level. And in this conversation, we get into some fascinating topics around including the difference between growth and scaling, and how Octopus Energy has created a culture of ownership where everyone takes responsibility. So enjoy this conversation. It's really insightful with Zoisa North-Bond. Hi there, Zoisa. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Great. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to jump in. I know that you are the chief executive of Octopus Energy Business and Octopus Energy Generation. And for those people who don't know, I know that Octopus Energy is the, I think, 23rd fastest growing company in Europe, according to the Financial Times. And so I'm really looking forward to diving into, your leadership journey and what you've experienced as the company has scaled so well in the last year. So thank you for joining me today.
No problem at all. Really excited to be here and talk about that.
Well, so why don't we start with like the elevator pitch, the quick summary, right? So who are you? What's your journey been? To get your, to come into this role of leading these divisions within Octopus. What was that journey like? And then just what's been going on in the business over the last couple of years? What's the growth that you've seen?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's probably better that I start in today and work backwards. I always find it easier that way. Obviously, being a kind of double CEO in a business like this, I think is a great example of something that has been created as a result of disruption and agile leadership as well, to be in that position. But Octopus Energy, of course, for people that don't know, it started 5 years ago exactly. And in that time, we've grown very rapidly. We have here in the UK 2 million customers and households. We are an energy retailer, but we're quite special in that we're the only energy retailer with actually a tech platform as well. So there are two distinct parts of the business, one in retail and one in actually technology and licensing. So we license our energy technology to other companies. So we're, as I said, based here in London in the UK, but our licensing takes us across the world. And we've also entered markets with our retail model as well. So we're in 5 countries here in the UK, Germany, the US, Japan, and Australia. And we obviously hope to keep growing in that way. Our growth over the last 5 years, we were valued last year at 2.1 billion, which made us a kind of double unicorn, actually, given our kind of age and our valuation together.
It's a double unicorn, a unicorn with 2 horns? What's
with
that?
2 horns, exactly. Or we like to we did even have things like an octocorn, so had 2 horns and all sorts of things, because you'll see behind me, we have a very distinctive character called Constantine, and we created that as a result, which was very exciting. But yes, a double unicorn. So amazing to have been part of a business like that. I actually arrived at Octopus Energy 3 years ago. So they were sort of 1.5, 2 years into the journey, actually, by the time I landed here. And I was just fascinated by what was going on, to be perfectly honest. I could see that there was this take on technology, and historically, in looking at the energy market, one of the things I've been really frustrated with, and I've been trying to do actually in another business, was enter the retail market. And I was always very annoyed by this third-party cost where you had to license in technology, and it made the price that you could supply energy to your customer so high it was ridiculous. And I used to think, well, this is ridiculous because I'm almost being held hostage to a technology company. And every single time there's an upgrade, it's something that you then have to take into your model and fundamentally hits the bottom line of the customer. So when I was reading a bit about Octopus Energy, and I really understood that they were actually here in the market, not just to do great things for customers, so serve customers with 5 stars on Trustpilot, and we're very, very rewarded, but to actually look at technology to be able to drive the cost down and supplying to the end customer. And something about that really fascinated me. So I actually got in touch with Greg, our main CEO, Greg Jackson, and wanted to come and had a bit of a chat. And I had a wander around, and the environment here was extraordinary. It was there was a tech team. It was very marketing led. Loads of great product people. Back in my early days, I was actually my first few roles were in marketing and PR, and it really reminded me of the vibe of a kind of creative agency, which you don't find that in the energy sector.
In energy,
you
no,
really
right,
don't.
absolutely.
So it was a bit like coming home. And when I sat down with him, kind of towards the end, we went and had lunch, and I said, "God, I'd love to work here." And he said, "I'd really like you to work here." Looking at my experience and my kind of journey into the energy sector, it was very varied because I had always had a very big focus on customers and people, and I think that's coming from a kind of marketing background into the energy sector. And actually, I'd found myself running an energy utility. So I was the CEO of a Dutch energy company here in the UK, and we were building wind and solar farms and supplying the energy to big customers to make them 100% sustainable. So corporations like Mars and Unilever were some of my customers there. And I really loved that model, but could really see that technology and the way that you supplied your customer, and you almost got the electron from the generating asset to the customer and what they read on their bill, was really tricky without that kind of core competency. So when I came and spoke to Greg, we talked a bit about that and what I could do here. And I think at the time it was a small business, it was a startup, and I knew in coming in I'd need to get my hands dirty across all kind of bits and pieces. But broadly speaking, I came in to set up Octopus Energy for Business, and that was established back in 2018, and it was using technology to drive down the cost of supplying green electricity to small businesses. And from there, we've looked at lots of different sectors as well, so small businesses across the UK, but then looking specifically at things like the green transport sector, and being able to drive down energy costs in the model to be able to fuel this generation of kind of fleets of EVs that we're going to see, which has been really exciting.
So what I'm hearing, so just interrupting there for a second, but what I find really interesting is, is this very marketing brand driven company, right? But it's more than that, because you're actually working at the tech level to change the cost structure, right? Because there's actually plenty of players who will try to put a new coat of paint on an existing thing and try to make it look good, but fundamentally it's the same. And, there isn't much room for maneuver. You just undercut the incumbents by a few percent to and give it perhaps a bit better customer service, perhaps. Whereas, as you said, if you kind of get into the weeds of how you put the offer together, then you can create some margin for new things, which sounds like what you've done.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting, it's been a very interesting time, because while we've driven the cost down for our own customers, because our mission is very much about tackling emissions and helping the planet accelerate to net zero. I think very early on realised that just keeping our technology platform that was being very successful for our own business could only take us so far. Actually being able to globalize and accelerate where we needed to get to, we needed to share that with other companies actually, and some of the efficiencies that we could create in our model. So that's the reason why we work with many other energy companies across the globe, so people like E.ON, npower, Origin in Australia, really to be able to kind of drive the cost down on energy. So it's those two things. Brand is very important for our retail business, and then actually it's our technology that's obviously core to our licensing business.
Yeah, no, fascinating. And it's obviously it's been a model that's worked elsewhere. I mean, we can think of Amazon and others, right, who have the technology platform and then the
Sure,
retail part.
sure,
And it's, I mean, it's cool, changing the game, right? It turns competitors into
absolutely.
partners. It moves you around on the value on the value chain, and yeah, really fascinating. So I can see why the company's finding that growth right engine, because it sounds pretty unique.
Indeed, yeah, and loving the would totally take the comparison to Amazon. I think that's a great company to be compared to in this setting, actually.
So tell me about like what's yeah, tell me about how the company scaled, and what you've experienced as it's done that over the last 3 years.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I know obviously we've sort of been talking about growth and scale here, and I think it's actually sometimes quite important to distinguish between the two. And I think
Okay.
we see growth very much as innovation into new areas, and then we see scale as almost things whereby we know the model very well and we're managing to deliver the model, but perhaps at much less cost than we might have done at the beginning. So it's a bit like the way I always have it in my mind is if you had acquired an account, a new account, and you need a team of 10 people to service that account because that's what you've done before, you're growing. Whereas actually, if you acquire an account and suddenly you need a team of 2 because you've learned about all the efficiencies, and actually in our case, the types of things that technology can do to make that more efficient, so you need 2 people. That is more scaling. So in our business, I would say that we do lots of things on the growth side, which is about innovation, and hopefully we'll get to talk a bit about that in a minute. Then on the scale side, I think it's more about our kind of plans and what we're doing internationally, and what we've managed to achieve kind of as a technology business. But it's very interesting because I think sometimes when you talk about the two, it's difficult to define between what those things mean.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Yeah, because yeah, I was yeah, no, really interesting. The way when you said growth versus scaling, my mind went somewhere, and actually your definition's almost the opposite of what I thought, but probably a better one. So I'm going to go with yours. I like that. Yeah, so
Okay, no,
scaling is actually
interesting.
yeah. Well, I guess I was kind of imagining that. Well, perhaps it's not quite so different. I was imagining scaling being that kind of change. Yeah, well, no, I guess it's the same thing. Changing the way that you're operating to release a new level of growth, which is, I guess, what you're saying. But then you're saying growth is really being, moving into new areas, new markets, new products.
Areas, indeed, and learning more things, and I think that's what kind of keeps it fresh and exciting, actually, as well.
Yeah, got it. So which of these has been the kind of your focus over the last few years?
I think probably the reason why I'm talking to you today is probably because I am somebody that's sat over both. So from a scale point of view, looking at the way that we use Kraken within our business to serve customers, and how we've managed to kind of go from a small energy provider of kind of 10,000 customers to now one that operates kind of across the world, but also with many other customers from some of our clients. So I think we've got 17 million contracted customers that will be joining that. So that side of things. But then also, I think I've been very instrumental to some of the growth storylines. So in particular, for instance, the generation piece. So this piece now is not just about the way that we supply customers with energy, but it's looking right down the chain to how we make energy as well. So it's a new area where we can use technology to link all of that, and hopefully using the principles from our core model that we're scaling, being able to kind of scale that too, as well as growing it.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting because generation is such a different business from energy, retail or distribution, right? I mean, that's it's quite it's quite an arcane business from what I remember when I was at Cisco. I was working on some of their smart grid projects and doing a lot of the economics, and yeah, it's a complex world, generation. So
yeah, it's a different world, and I think where we see it is actually using technology to make it smarter and more straightforward for the customer. It shouldn't actually be such a difficult model to actually understand. And what we see of that of this sector as well is that I think for many generations now, people have seen generation as an investment, so a financial asset where you're kind of trying to create a yield from it, rather than an essential part of the kind of energy mix that, if looked at in the right way, using the right systems, you can attach to customers and drive down the cost of electrons. So we have lots of lovely models here. One of them, for instance, is called the Fan Club, where we have a wind turbine sat at the corner of a village. And when the wind is blowing, the postcode area that's near to the turbine will get 50% off their energy bill, because actually we're saying, well, if the electron is traveling a shorter distance to get to that customer's home, and it's not having to join a national grid network, which becomes quite complicated, and we can use technology to be able to track those electrons from our fan or our wind turbine, but we call them fans, to the home, then why should customers be paying more for green electrons in that model? So it's a very interesting space, but using some of the principles that everybody knows Octopus Energy for, I think we can make a huge difference and make it way less complex, actually.
These conversations are all about scaling yourself to scale your business. And one of the biggest barriers that stops us from doing that is getting stuck in operations and not spending time on the most valuable strategic work. So I do recommend that you take our free executive productivity assessment. It's just 10 quick questions to find out exactly where you are on the journey to executive time management mastery. You'll then discover how you can free yourself up for more strategic activity. To take the assessment, head to xquadrant.com/go/productivity assessment with a hyphen between those two last words. Now, back to the conversation.
Yeah.
No, interesting, really interesting. And so, what have you found have been kind of some of the difficulties, right? Because I mean, I'm thinking, I guess, especially organizationally, right? Because when you're scaling and growing on these different areas, all these moving parts, that puts quite a lot of pressure on the system and the people within it. So kind of what's your experience been from the inside on that?
Yeah, I think to be honest, it's because of the kind of work environment we have, which is extremely open, very transparent. Everybody is very contactable at whatever level you might sit at with a flat structure. It's quite visible when you might need to invest in more people, because actually suddenly you've grown enormously overnight. And I mean, I would say that in terms of kind of major difficulties, it's almost been finding people quickly enough that can come into the business as we've grown. That probably has been the main thing. But looking at how we've created efficiencies using the tech, it's not a people heavy model necessarily, but I would say it certainly sometimes is finding the right people quickly enough, I would say, is probably the biggest thing we may have found over the years. But it's not something that I could sit here, I think, and say on a day-to-day level we've experienced many issues with the types of growth we've seen. I think, again, that's because of the kind of outlook of the business and the way that we set it up from the outset, which was intentionally kind of people process light, and always looking at, rather than doing things manually and following what we know companies might have done before, thinking about how we automate processes and we change them. And in getting people in, we've always as well made them feel very empowered. So in terms of the way that we maybe deal with customer operations, I would say here, you look across the company, we've probably got, while yes, we're a group of companies with CEOs like me as part of it, we've probably got many more than that, probably about 150, because everyone seems to take that level of responsibility for what they do. And actually, in sort of resolving issues, people do those kind of very independently, and they also kind of take great pride in making sure that the teams that they might have around them, or the teams that we have around them, also kind of learn those skills almost as one of the core things from day one of them entering the company. So it does mean that actually you don't sort of end up with many fires to fight in that way, because we have extremely competent people, and as I said, I think very often it's making sure that we continue to find those right people as we continue scaling and growing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Many CEOs would dream of a world where everyone is thinking like a CEO and taking responsibility in that way. What do you think is the reason for that? How have you achieved that?
Again, it's because we have never infantilized people. So bringing them in, I think most people know, I think there was some comments made, we don't actually have an HR department, for instance, here, because we believe managers should manage and they should manage people, So you come in and you have that sense of personal responsibility. We also are a company where everybody that joins has equity. So they have a share or some options in the company. So when they're here, they all feel that we're building our own future. This is something that we're invested in too, and I think that has made it very different from certainly any other organization I might have worked at, where you get people coming in and wanting to take great personal responsibility for what they do. Again, I think another reason is technology. So Kraken, for instance, when I think about typically how you would contact an energy company, and you might kind of be on the phone and you go through to a department and they'll say, okay, we've done your meter read, but we need to transfer you on to a different department because you now need to do something with your balance, and then they'll transfer you somewhere else. So you probably had this experience. I think most people do. Now what Kraken did right from the beginning was try and disrupt that whole journey for the customer when they contacted the organization, and we wanted it to be able to go to one point and for one person to be able to solve any number of issues. And I think in doing that, that is why actually you look across teams and you have team leaders who become kind of the CEO of their team, and you'll have one team servicing 60,000 customers, which is almost a little business in its own right. It really is. And actually everybody within that business takes that personal responsibility as if they're sort of part of the leadership team of that little team, wanting to make sure that professionally they're doing the right things for those customers, because they don't want complaints escalated. They don't want necessarily to feel like their kind of personal sense of ownership of what they're doing has to kind of draw on other people. So I'd say those certainly those things, which is the right people, the technology, and also giving people a sense of ownership in terms of the equity they have in the business as well.
Yeah, I love it. I love the both sides of that, right? That on the one hand, you empower, on the other hand, put your money where your mouth is, right? Of it, and actually
totally
give people an interest in it. Yeah. So it's a fantastic conversation. No matter what we've achieved, there's always a next level to get to. So what's yours? As the business continues to grow, continues to scale, you add new business lines, move into new markets. How's your own leadership going to need to change?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting one, because I would say there's a couple of things. My personal mantra is often what's got me here isn't necessarily going to get me there. And that's really important. And I kind of live every day that way in many ways. And the other one is making sure that if you're looking back a year ago, you're not doing exactly the same things that you're doing today. So we're always encouraged to kind of think forwards, and that's kind of really important. And it's one of the reasons why I never actually over plan and write plans, because I think very often when you're looking at a plan, you're kind of fixating on targets which aren't actually necessarily right for the environment, and they're a rear view mirror, they're not a forward looking mirror. So for me personally, it's about continuing to be curious and question why we're doing things and how we're doing things, we have recently gone into this area of generation, and it will be a very big one for us in the next year. So we've also have Octopus Renewables joining our family, which represents about £3.4 billion worth of renewable assets. So there's going to be a lot to learn there, because as you were rightly saying kind of at the beginning, you look at the generation side, and they haven't yet gone through, I think, this tech revolution that we've managed to bring to retail in the same way. Right. So there is going to be a lot more of applying some of the things I know and some of the things I don't into being able to get generation also now into the 21st century of looking at the benefits that technology can bring into that model to make sure that we're continuing to drive the cost down for end customers. So for me, it's going to be continuing to be curious, but continuing to be really agile, not being possessive over the things that I do. And I think that's really important. I've never been a possessive person, so it's kind of quite helpful. And I think also in doing that, continuing to bring more colleagues on that really scare me with their thinking, so that actually it forces me forwards as well. And they scare me because they're really competent in the models that we're creating, but they also challenge the way that I think. So I think for me, there will be a lot more of that coming up, certainly.
Yeah, because I guess if I was just to push you a little bit, because there's a lot of, I think it was great what you were saying, and it makes a lot of sense. But there's quite a bit of like, I'm going to continue to be curious, right? And I'm continue to be agile. So is there a, is there a shift that you perhaps haven't made before that you feel you will need to make in the future? Or is it just more of the same? Perhaps the question, is it growth or scaling might be the question.
Yes, yeah. So I would say at the beginning, it's certainly growth, and it's looking at innovation in the model, and being very curious and open to what could come. So not having a closed mindset and thinking, say, on the scale business, well, I know that works and that's how it works. Actually, in this side, it's going to be, I don't necessarily know why that works, and I should be asking why the whole time, and looking at kind of certain processes and procedures and challenging why they need to be there. So I would say to a certain extent, for part of my role for the last year, it might have been very much around spotting things to replicate and keeping things the same. And actually now in this new role, it's going to be much more thinking, well, it doesn't necessarily need to stay the same. So it's going to be shifting mindsets, and balancing those two.
Perfect. Well, thank you. So if people want to find out more about you or about Octopus, where do they go? What's the best place to go?
So the best places would be to go to our group website, which is octopusenergygroup.com, or visit my LinkedIn page as well. And I'm always very open to people messaging me and asking questions. I love kind of hearing from people about thoughts, and particularly on some of the things that I might have been saying here. So very open to that too.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you, Zoisa. I've loved some of these insights, the difference between growth and scaling. Yeah, I think just making this whole point that, as you said, let's not infantilize people. Let's actually empower them, incentivize them, and let them have at their own part of the business, which I think, is something clearly that you guys have done and heard that. And then this whole thing around, I guess, these two dials of retail and branding and technology and cost structure, which seem to be the key dials that have kind of propelled your growth over the last few years. So thank you for the conversation.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you very much for asking me to join you.
Thank you. Goodbye. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's talk about you. When you're in top leadership, when you're in the biggest role of your career, who supports you at a deep level as you lead others? Who helps you multiply your impact and get to the next level? If you're ready to learn more about our content, our coaching, and our community, then visit us at xquadrant.com.